There's a moment in the first season finale where a father holds his son's broken face up to an oncoming train and keeps it there, and the show does not cut away. And the first time I watched it, I remember realizing somewhere in my chest before my brain caught up that this series had no ceiling, none. And the strangest part is that the train is not even the worst thing that happens in that episode. Invincible has spent 4 seasons and 5 years going further than any mainstream animated series has ever gone. And the moments people call too far are not accidents, they are the architecture. Tonight we are going through all of them, from the sealed room in episode 1 to the deal that ended season 4, every line the show crossed and what it bought by crossing. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed, it really does help us keep making these. Welcome to Rock. Stay on that train for a minute because everything this video is about is inside it. The episode is Where I Really Come From, the 8th and final chapter of Season 1, released on April 29th, 2021, written by Robert Kirkman himself. By the time the train arrives, the worst conversation in the show's history has already happened. Nolan Grayson has told his son the truth, that he is not Earth's protector, but its advanced man, that the Viltrum Empire is coming, that humanity's purpose is service, and that everything Mark believed about his childhood was set dressing on a conquest. Mark refuses him. And so Nolan, the strongest being on the planet, decides to teach his 17-year-old son what humans are worth using humans. I want to describe what actually happens in this stretch of the episode plainly, because the show's reputation for violence tends to blur into abstraction, and the specifics are the point. Nolan does not fight Mark so much as grade him. He beats him through the city, through the sky, through a baseball stadium. When Mark tries to protect people, Nolan converts the people into arguments. A plane full of passengers becomes a demonstration about futility. And then comes the subway. Nolan drags his son down into the tunnel, holds him by the head against the rails, facing the light of the oncoming train, and lets it happen. Lets the train hit them both at full speed, with Mark's body as the plow. The show renders the aftermath in detail most live-action series would refuse. The commuters, the carriage, the human wreckage scattered around a boy who is screaming because he could not stop his own body from being the weapon. Nolan's lesson, delivered while his son shakes among the dead, is that these beings are insignificant, that within a single human lifetime, Mark will have outgrown the memory of every one of them. Think about the construction of that scene for a second, because the show is doing something more deliberate than shock. Every previous superhero story about a hero turned evil gives the violence a target, a city, an enemy, a building. This scene gives it a curriculum. The civilians on that train die as teaching materials, selected by a father to win an argument with his child, and the horror the episode is actually selling is not the gore at all. It is the pedagogy, the idea that a being could love his son genuinely in his way and structure a massacre as a lecture. The train is where the series planted its flag, 8 episodes into its existence, on the question this entire video will keep returning to. The show does not go too far for the sake of the dead, it goes too far for the sake of the living, because every body in that tunnel exists to make one boy's refusal mean something. Mark, half-conscious, bleeding into the rails, keeps refusing. That is the scene. The going too far is the price tag the show puts on a single word, no. And inside the lesson sits the exchange the fandom has never stopped quoting, the moment the episode's whole machinery exists to deliver. Nolan, holding his ruined son, makes the Empire's final argument, the argument of lifespans, that everything Mark loves is temporary, that in 500 years the world he is bleeding for will be dust and strangers. He asks what Mark will even have left by then. And Mark, through everything broken in him, gives the answer that has outlived every meme made from this episode. He would still have his father. The show lets the sentence land on Nolan like no punch in the fight ever did. And the lesson collapses, the teacher unable to survive the student's answer, and the most violent episode in the history of mainstream animation turns out to pivot on the gentlest line in it. That is the show's whole method stated in its first finale. The going too far was never the destination. It was the pressure required to make a few soft words unanswerable. And Chicago is the invoice. The fight ends with the city in ruins. With casualties, the series has the discipline to count in the thousands, and to keep counting for seasons afterward, in memorials, in grief support groups, in a scientist named Scott Duvall, whose story we will reach in time, all of it descending from this one episode. The finale closes not on triumph, but on a kind of stunned silence, Nolan breaking. unable to finish his own lesson, fleeing the planet rather than kill his son, and Mark in a hospital bed learning that survival and victory are different words. The episode was, at the time, the most violent thing a mainstream American animated series had ever aired, and the reviews treated it as a watershed, and the fandom has spent 5 years clipping it, memeing it, and arguing about it. But the reason it belongs at the start of tonight's catalog is simpler. Every line the show crossed afterward, every moment in this video was negotiated in advance by this episode. The train told you the rules. Nothing is sacred except consequence. The show will show you anything as long as it intends to make you live with it. But the truth is that the series had already gone too far once before, 7 episodes earlier, in its very first hour, in a sealed room full of the most trusted people on Earth. The train was the thesis defended, the conference room was the thesis announced, and it is still, 5 years and 4 seasons later, the most shocking thing this franchise has ever done. The first episode of Invincible is called It's About Time. It premiered on March 25th, 2021. And for 50-some minutes, it is a warm, funny, slightly old-fashioned superhero show. The Mahler twins attack the White House and are repelled by the Guardians of the Globe, the world's premier hero team fighting alongside Omni-Man. Mark Grayson gets his powers, burns his first landing, tells his parents over dinner. His father takes him flying. There is a tailor and a first suit and a name. It is, deliberately, the pilot of the show the marketing promised. And then, in its final minutes, the episode walks the Guardians into their own headquarters, one by one, summoned by an emergency signal, and the doors seal. And the man who called them there steps out of the shadows, and it is Omni-Man, and he kills all of them. The sequence deserves to be described with the same care the show made it with, because it has been memed so thoroughly that people forget what is actually in it. This is not a fight that goes wrong. It is an ambush built on 20 years of trust, the heroes arriving one at a time to a friend's signal, and the show lets each of them register the impossibility before it kills them. They fight back hard, War Woman, and the immortal hardest of all. And the fact that 7 of the world's greatest heroes together nearly take him down is the one mercy the scene allows them, the dignity of costing him something. Nolan finishes the massacre barely conscious, standing in a room the show has painted floor to ceiling in the people he worked beside for 2 decades, and collapses among them. That is the image the first episode of this series chose to end on. Not a cliffhanger, an autopsy report. The episode cuts to credits with no music to tell you how to feel, and the silence was, for millions of people in the spring of 2021, the moment this show stopped being a cartoon. The production history confirms how central the scene was to the whole project. Kirkman has publicly singled out the work of the show's animation studio on the Guardians' deaths as a high watermark of the first season, and the season's famous title card gimmick. The show's logo accumulating more blood with every episode was, by his own account, designed to promise the audience that the darkness glimpsed in episode 1 was a trajectory, not a stumble. The marketing had hidden the twist completely, the casting had disguised it, famous actors and roles built to imply longevity, and the premiere's release strategy, 3 episodes at once, ensured that the massacre defined the series in public from its first day. We covered the strategy of that deception in another video. Tonight, what matters is the content of it, because the scene is the franchise's founding act of going too far, and it set the template for every entry that follows. The violence lands on the trusted. The camera refuses both flinching and relish. And the going too far is never the end of a story, it is the beginning of one. Because the entire series, every season of it, is the consequence ledger of those few minutes in that room. It is worth pausing on what the massacre did to the show's world, because the series itself never stops pausing on it. The Guardians' deaths are not a clean slate, they are an open wound the show keeps consulting. The funeral episode gives the grief a public face and a private one, a televised memorial, and then the real burials. Red Rush's widow Olga sells her house through Debbie because she cannot live inside the silence. Darkwing's death leaves a sidekick carrying a haunted mantle. Aquarus's murder nearly triggers a war with an undersea kingdom, and the show makes Mark answer for it personally in season 2. The Immortal comes back wrong twice, and his rage at Nolan becomes one of the engines of the first season's endgame. An entire support group of superhero widows and widowers appears in season 2, people the show invented specifically so that the massacre would keep having an address. Most series that stage a shocking death spend an episode on the shock and move on. This one built a civic infrastructure of mourning and kept it running for 4 seasons. That is the show's actual radicalism. Anyone can kill 7 heroes in episode 1. Almost nobody is willing to fund the grief department for 5 years. And the massacre established one more rule, the quietest and most important one, the rule that separates this series from the imitators its success spawned. The show went too far with the deaths, but it refused, and has always refused, to go far with the dying. There is no torture in that room, no savoring, no villain monologue over the bodies. The kills are fast, industrial, almost administrative, and the camera's attention is on the faces, the disbelief, the betrayal arriving a half second before the fist does. The gore is the receipt, not the product. Compare that against the genre's edgier corners, and you can see the line the show drew for itself on day 1, the line between depicting cruelty and performing it. The series crosses every threshold of what can be shown. It almost never crosses the threshold of why. Every horror in tonight's catalog will pass through that needle. In the few moments where the fandom argued the show had finally slipped, had finally relished something, those are the moments we will slow down for. The first of them arrived 5 episodes later in a university basement wearing a lab coat and a polite smile, and it remains, for a particular generation of viewers, the single most disturbing storyline the show has ever run, because it is the one where the monster's victims had to keep on living. D.A. Sinclair is introduced in the 6th episode of Season 1, You Look Kinda Dead, as a brilliant student at Upstate University with a side project. The side project is people. Sinclair has been abducting students and converting them into what he calls Reanimen, surgically fused cadaver cyborgs, flesh and machinery integrated into obedient soldiers. And the episode is structured as the show's first true horror story, complete with a basement, a slab, and a victim the audience already knows. Because the person on Sinclair's table, partway through the episode, is Rick Sheridan, the kind, beautiful boy that Mark's best friend William has been falling for all season. The show built a romantic subplot for 5 episodes specifically so that it could wheel one half of it into a vivisection lab. What makes the storyline land in the Too Far catalog is not the surgery, which the show frames with relative restraint. It is the 2 aftermaths. The first belongs to a student named Doug Cheston, an earlier victim converted more completely than Rick, and the episode hands him the darkest single beat of the season. Mid-fight, Doug catches sight of himself, of what has been done to him, the machinery where his life used to be, and he chooses not to continue existing. And the show lets that choice happen on screen, a victim's final act of authorship over a body that was taken from him. It is handled quickly and without music, and it is the first moment in the series where the violence has no combat in it at all, just a person reading his own medical chart and declining. I will say this part gently and move on because the show itself moves gently. The scene exists to state, once with finality, what Sinclair's crime actually is. Not murder. Murder ends. Sinclair's victims have to wake up every day inside the evidence. The second aftermath is Rick's, and it runs for the rest of the series. Rick survives in the qualified way this show lets people survive. William's voice reaches whatever is left of him on the slab, and Rick overcomes his conditioning, helps stop Sinclair, and is taken away to be repaired by people with the budget to try. The show then does the thing that separates it from every series that would have used this as a 1-episode trauma. It keeps Rick. Season 2 and beyond show him recovering by degrees, struggling, relapsing into the wreckage of himself, loved the entire time by a young man who refuses to treat him as a casualty. The storyline the fandom calls one of the show's darkest is also, played out over years, one of its most stubbornly hopeful, and the hope is what makes the horror honest. The show went too far on Rick's body so that it could spend 3 seasons arguing that a person is not what was done to them. And then there is the third aftermath, the institutional one, the one the show holds like a card up its sleeve for 2 full seasons. Sinclair's arrested, and then the final minutes of the season 1 finale, in the middle of cataloging the world's response to Omni-Man's betrayal, include a line of business that most viewers barely registered at the time. Cecil Stedman, director of the Global Defense Agency, commissions Sinclair, the student butcher, the maker of the Reanimen, to mass-produce his contingency troops for the government. The monster got a contract. The show does not underline it, does not score it ominously, just files it, the way institutions file things, and lets the audience forget. 2 seasons later, in the opening episodes of Season 3, the file reopens, and the reopening is the moment the series formally extends its Too Far catalog from villains to heroes. Because Season 3 begins with Mark discovering what the agency he works for has been building in the basement. The premiere and its follow-up, A Deal with the Devil, walk him and us through the full inventory. Reanimen by the warehouse. Sinclair in a government lab, rehabilitated into an asset. And when Mark objects, when the argument between him and Cecil escalates past the point of management, Cecil reaches for the contingency that has been sitting inside Mark's own skull, a sonic device implanted without his knowledge or consent, tuned to frequencies that drop the strongest being on the agency's roster into a screaming heap. The show stages the activation in close-up. A man Mark trusted, a man the audience has spent 2 seasons learning to respect, pushes a button, and the boy who survived Omni-Man is on the floor of a government facility, disabled by his own protector, while dead men in armor close in around him. The Guardians have to intervene against their own employer. The team splits over it permanently, and Mark ends the relationship with a sentence the show plays as quietly as it can afford, a promise that if Cecil comes near his family again, Mark will kill him. Here is why this arc belongs in tonight's catalog rather than just in a list of plot twists. Every previous too-far moment in the series was committed by someone the story was willing to call a monster. The skull implant is committed by the story's most reasonable man for reasons he can defend in complete sentences, and the show grants him the flashback episode that makes the defense sting, the scarred face, the formative catastrophe, the personal code built from watching politeness get people killed. The series is deliberately dissolving the comfort it spent 2 seasons selling you, the comfort of believing that going too far is something that happens on the other side of a moral line. Cecil's implant, Sinclair's contract, the Reanimen warehouse, all of it is the state's version of Nolan's train, harm pre-justified by arithmetic, the strong deciding what the weak will absorb for the greater number. The first season asked what a father is allowed to do to a son. The third asks what a government is allowed to do to a 17-year-old asset, and the show's answer, both times, is to show you exactly what it looks like and let the question keep its teeth. But between those 2 seasons, the show went somewhere it had never gone before, off Earth entirely, to a gentle planet of insects with 9-month lifespans, and what happened there is, by sheer arithmetic of suffering, one of the most catastrophic things the series has ever depicted, and one of the least discussed. It is time to talk about Thraxa. Season 2 keeps Nolan off-screen for its first episodes, and the absence is strategic. The show lets you sit with the wreckage he left, the broken son, the gutted wife, the planet quietly preparing for the empire he promised. And then, in the 4th episode, It's Been a While, released on November 24th, 2023, it answers the question nobody had dared to ask out loud. Where does a being like that go after failing to destroy his family? The answer arrives by way of an insectoid alien named Nual Zot, who lands on Earth and asks Mark with disarming politeness to come to his planet because his people need help, and because the man who leads them is Mark's father. The planet is Thraxa, and the show builds it as the gentlest place the series has ever visited. The Thraxans are a civilization of insectoid beings whose natural lifespan runs about 9 months. A culture of beautiful architecture and accumulated wisdom maintained by generations that turn over like seasons, every adult. A few months from the end, every tradition carried by relay. And ruling them, at their own insistence, is Nolan Grayson, the mass murderer of Chicago, who fled his shame into the one corner of the universe where his immortality could be useful instead of monstrous. Mark arrives expecting to fight him. What he finds instead is worse from his point of view, and the show knows it is worse. He finds his father remarried to a Thraxan woman named Andressa, kind, luminous, utterly unafraid of what Nolan is. And he finds a baby, a half-brother, purple-skinned, months old, already growing. The show gives Mark the full collision in a single scene. The father who beat him half to death and abandoned Earth has not been suffering in exile, he has been starting over, replacing the family he broke with one that breaks faster. And Mark's grief comes out as the only thing it can at 17, fury that he was that easy to replace. And then the Empire arrives, and the episode's domestic drama is revealed to have been the fuse on a war crime. Because Nolan, by deserting his post and hiding on Thraxa, has made the planet evidence, and the Viltrum Empire does not tolerate evidence. 3 Viltrumite soldiers descend on Thraxa at the end of the 4th episode, Lucan, Vidor, and Thula, and what follows, spilling into the 5th episode, This Must Come as a Shock, is the series' first true depiction of what the Empire does to a world at scale. The soldiers do not fight Thraxa's defenders, because Thraxa has no defenders. It has Nolan and Mark and a civilization of 9-month lives underneath them. The show stages the attack as pure asymmetry, cities crushed casually, crowds of Thraxans annihilated as punctuation between exchanges of dialogue, an entire gentle culture experiencing in one night the thing Nolan had spent 20 years preparing for Earth. Mark, still barely recovered from Chicago, is beaten nearly to death a second time, this time defending his father's second world from his father's first employer. And Nolan, fighting beside his son for the first time, takes the wound the fandom still talks about, Lucan opening him from chest to gut, a disemboweling the show renders with unflinching clarity. The strongest man 2 worlds have ever known, holding himself together with his hands. The arithmetic of Thraxa is worth stating plainly, because the show, characteristically, never says the number. The Viltrumite punishment raid kills Thraxans in numbers the episode can only suggest, cities of them a meaningful fraction of a species, and the deaths carry a cruelty unique in the series, because Thraxan lives are 9 months long. A human civilization rebuilds in a generation and mourns for several. Thraxa's mourners will not live to finish mourning. The survivors who clear the rubble will be dead of age before the rubble is cleared, and the children who inherit the rebuilt cities will know the attack only as a story their parents' lived. 3 relay handoffs away within 2 of our years, Mark stays 2 months helping them rebuild. The 5th episode tells us 2 months that are, in Thraxan terms, a third of a lifetime donated by a being who will live centuries. The show plays none of this for tears. It just leaves the math on the table, the way it always does, and lets you do it yourself at 2 in the morning. And the episode's most quietly devastating going too far is not physical at all. It is the ending of the Thraxa arc, the Viltrumites dragging Nolan away for execution, his crimes against the Empire finally collected, and the words he manages as they take him. He tells his son, in substance, that this is what the Empire does, and then, barely audible, that he missed him. The show has been building to some version of that admission since the train tunnel, and it chooses to deliver it here, in the middle of a atrocity zone, from a man being hauled off to die, to a son who spent the whole visit hating him for being happy. The series' violence gets the headlines. Its actual weapon has always been timing. The first I Missed You in the franchise arrives approximately 1 apocalypse too late, and lands harder than any disembowelment in the episode. Thraxa belongs in tonight's catalog for one more reason, a structural one. It is the moment the show's too far stopped being a family matter. Chicago was horrifying, but it was, in the show's framing, a domestic dispute with collateral, one family's catastrophe played out across a city. Thraxa is policy. The 3 soldiers who broke that planet were not rogue, not conflicted, not Nolan mid-breakdown. They were the institution functioning as design, punishment delivered at species scale, by professionals on schedule. From this point forward, the series' violence has a context that makes every individual horror worse. The knowledge that somewhere above the sky there is an organization for which Thraxa was a Tuesday. The show went too far on a planet of innocence, specifically to teach the audience the difference between a monster and an empire. A monster can repent. Nolan is proof. An empire just files the after-action report. Which brings us to the place where the Empire keeps its filing cabinets, and to what it was doing during those same episodes, to the friendliest character the show has. Because while Thraxa burned, Alan the alien was learning personally what Viltrumite discipline looks like from the inside of it, and his chapter of this catalog begins with an ambush in deep space and ends in a prison. The show built specifically to demonstrate that the Empire treats its own exactly as gently as it treats everyone else. Alan the alien spends season 1 as the show's pressure valve, the running gag with a heart, the orange giant who attacks the wrong planets and apologizes warmly. So when season 2 opens its space storyline by having 3 Viltrumite soldiers ambush him in the void, the show is making a deliberate withdrawal from its own comedy account. The beating Alan takes is rendered at length and without rescue, a one-sided demolition that leaves the friendliest face in the series, drifting, broken almost beyond function, an eye ruined, his body a map of what Viltrumite attention costs. The 3rd episode of the season, this missive, this machination, deepens the wound with history, flashbacks to Alan's homeworld of Unopa under Viltrumite attack, the context that turns a beating into a continuation. The Empire did not just hurt Alan, The Empire is why Alan exists, the reason his people engineered a champion, and the ambush is the institution reminding its old project who holds the patent on violence. What makes the Alan material belong in tonight's catalog is not the brutality itself, which the show has matched elsewhere. It is the aftermath's coldness, the way the series uses his broken body to introduce the Empire's economy of cruelty. Alan survives, and his survival is itself a complication, because his engineered biology responds to catastrophic injury by rebuilding stronger, which means the Empire's punishment literally upgrades its enemy, a detail the Viltrumites themselves eventually notice with clinical interest. Stronger or not, he is captured, and the show moves him into the setting where Season 2 and 3 conduct their quietest atrocities. A Viltrumite prison, the Empire's own internal justice system, and the series uses that prison to demonstrate something it had only implied before. The Empire's violence is not reserved for the conquered. It is the whole culture, pointed in every direction at once, including inward. Because the prison is where Nolan is taken after Thraxa, and the sentence waiting for him there is the Empire's signature ritual, execution by his own kind for the crime of growing a conscience. The show lets the machinery of that sentence grind across episodes, the waiting, the formalities, the executioners with their ceremonial roles, and it stages the most telling beat of the whole arc in the cell Nolan and Alan share. Two enemies of the Empire, one engineered to fight it and one retired from running it, becoming friends through a wall of held-back information, and the friendship is the point because it is the one thing the institution around them has no category for. The Empire understands defiance and crushes it. It understands weakness and culls it. What it cannot process is two of its victims, one of them its own greatest son, quietly deciding they would rather talk than despair. When the breakout finally comes in Season 3, with Battle Beast tearing through the facility for his own reasons and Alan seizing the chaos, the show gives the escape real joy, and the joy lands precisely because the preceding episodes were so airless. The series went too far in that prison the way prisons go too far everywhere, not with spectacle, but with procedure. And it wanted you to feel the difference between the two kinds of cruelty it had now shown you, the kind that breaks a planet in a night, and the kind that fills out the paperwork to break a man on schedule. And the Empire's penal theology pays off, with interest, in the single most quietly chilling, structural choice of the early seasons. The executions Nolan awaits are not anomalies. The show salts its space material with the Empire's internal discipline, soldiers monitored, loyalty tested, deviation cataloged, the same fewer than 50 population we discussed in another video policing itself with the fervor of an institution that knows, at some buried level, that it is one generation of doubt away from extinction. Viltrumite culture, as the series depicts it, is an organism that survived a plague by amputating everything in itself that was not weapon, and the prison arc exists to show you the amputation as an ongoing process, performed daily on its own. When people ask why the show's Empire feels scarier than the genre's other evil armadas, this is the answer. The Viltrumites are not cruel to humanity in particular. Humanity is simply standing in the blast radius of how they treat themselves. Earth, meanwhile, was conducting its own seminar in institutional cruelty, and the show staged it underwater in the season's second episode, the one with the title Nobody Can Say with a Straight Face, "In about 6 hours, I lose my virginity to a fish." The episode's joke title is camouflage for one of the series' most pointed early going too far arguments, because this is the Atlantis episode, the one where Mark is formally made to answer for his father's murder of Aquarius, the undersea king and original guardian. Earth's diplomats hand him over to Atlantean justice with the queasy pragmatism of governments everywhere, and the show walks its 17-year-old through an alien legal system whose remedies escalate from the absurd, an ancient custom involving the widowed queen, to the lethal trial by combat against a deep-sea monstrosity. The proceedings played for comedy right up until the moment they are not. The episode is remembered as a romp. What it establishes is anything but. A child can be billed for his father's crimes, formally, internationally, with his own government signature on the invoice, and the world the show is building will keep that precedent and use it in courtrooms and prisons and public opinion for the rest of the series. The first season asked what a father could do to a son. Season 2's quiet innovation was to ask what everyone else could do to the son on the father's behalf, and the answer, delivered while the audience was still laughing at the episode title, was anything they can justify. So by the midpoint of season 2, the show had gone too far through a parent, an empire, a prison, and a courtroom. What it had not yet done, what it had been saving, was to go too far through the hero's own incompetence, to stage a catastrophe with no villain mastermind at all, just a team, a mission, and the ordinary physics of things going wrong. That catastrophe has a name in the fandom, and the name is the Silo, and it is the reason 3 of the show's heroes will never be whole again. The mission sounds like a footnote. The Lizard League, the show's resident joke villains, a gang of snake-themed criminals the series had treated as comic relief, sees a missile installation, and a detachment of Guardians is dispatched to handle it. Rexplode, Shrinking Ray, and Duplicate. 3 heroes for a gang of costumed reptiles, the kind of assignment teams like this clear before lunch. The engagement spans the boundary between the 5th and 6th episodes of Season 2. This must come as a shock, and it's not that simple. And what happens inside that silo is the worst thing the Guardians of the Globe have experienced since the night Omni-Man called them to headquarters. The difference is that Omni-Man was the strongest being on the planet. The silo was lost to nobody. The silo was lost to underestimation, and the show stages every beat of it as ordinary tactical friction, the kind that kills real soldiers in real wars. No mastermind, no twist. Just a fight that goes wrong in a confined space against enemies who were not respected enough to be feared. The casualty report reads like the show is checking items off a list of things series like this are not supposed to do to their heroes. Shrinking Ray is swallowed, not grabbed, not crushed, swallowed by Komodo Dragon on screen, and the show lets the team and the audience believe for episodes that she is simply gone, digested, the most absurd death the series has ever staged, and staged precisely because its absurdity is the point. There are no dignified deaths in a fight you did not take seriously. She survives, it is eventually revealed, having shrunk at the last moment, and is recovered from the aftermath in a state the show declines to soften, a body ruined by the inside of another body. Rexplode takes a bullet through the head from King Lizard, an execution-style shot to the skull of a hero whose whole power is in his hands, and the 6th episode opens with the quiet miracle and the quiet horror of him surviving it, brain damaged into a long recovery, the team's loudest mouth relearning the room. And Duplicate is shredded, every duplicate on the field destroyed in the melee, a death the show presents as total and then mourns at length. The immortal, her lover, breaking over it in scenes the series plays with complete sincerity, only to reveal in the season finale that one Kate, held in reserve, survived, a resurrection we have examined from other angles on other nights. Tonight, what matters is what the silo did to the show's covenant with its audience, because this was the episode that taught the fandom a rule the series has never since broken. The going too far does not require a Viltrumite, it does not require anyone special at all. The floor of this universe is lava everywhere, and the show will burn its heroes on the most embarrassing square of it available, specifically so that no future battle, however small it looks, ever again arrives pre-survived. And the silo set the table for the finale, because a team that has just buried 1 member and hospitalized 2 more is a team with nothing left in reserve when the real enemy finally moves. The season's endgame begins with the 8th episode, I Thought You Were Stronger, and it begins not at a missile base or a government facility, but at the one address the entire series had trained you to believe was off the board, the Grayson House. Angstrom Levy, the portal-wielding scientist whose origin opened the season, whose grudge against Mark had been simmering in the background through every episode, walks into the family home, and the show stages the violation with the patience of a horror film, because Angstrom understands the show he is in better than any villain before him. He does not attack Invincible. He takes Debbie and Oliver, a mother and a toddler, hostage in their own kitchen. And when Mark arrives, the season's final battle begins with the hero compromised in the only way that has ever actually worked on him. What follows is the show's first full multiverse sequence, and it weaponizes wonder. Angstrom hurls Mark through portal after portal, world after world, a tour of realities conducted at the speed of violence. And the tour is itself the going too far, because nearly every world they pass through is a crime scene, an Earth conquered or ruined or ruled by some other Mark. The multiverse as an exhibition of the protagonist's guilt in aggregate. Angstrom narrates as he punishes, his grievance bleeding across realities, and the structure of the fight makes his madness legible in a way no monologue could. He is beating one Mark for the sins of thousands, and the show lets you feel both the injustice of it and the terrible coherence. The sequence tightens until the two of them land alone in a barren dimension, empty sky, dead rock, no witnesses. And there, far from every kitchen and every camera, the season finale arrives at the moment it had been built to deliver. The moment the series finally asks its hero the question the whole franchise orbits. What are you, under sufficient pressure, actually like? The answer is the single most upsetting passage of violence in the first 2 seasons, and the show knows it. Because for the first time, the perpetrator is Mark. With his family's lives at stake and his enemy's portals the only road home, Mark does not subdue Angstrom Levy. He destroys him. The beating is long, screamed through, animal, the bright young hero of the series, pounding a man's body past resistance, past consciousness, past, as far as Mark can tell when his arms finally stop, life itself. The episode strands him there, in the silence after, kneeling over what he believes is a corpse he made, his own hands the going too far at last, and Angstrom's final bewildered words hanging in the dead air. He thought Mark was stronger. The show holds the moment without rescue, without music, without an off-ramp. A 17-year-old alone in an empty universe with the discovery that his father's blood is not a metaphor. Mark is eventually found and brought home. The boy who comes back is not the boy who left, and Season 3, as we have already seen from other angles, is the story of everyone on Earth slowly noticing. It is worth dwelling on the tour itself for a moment because the multiverse sequence is the series committing a subtle atrocity against its own audience, and almost nobody files it. Every world Angstrom drags Mark through is a finished story, a complete timeline with its own history, and the glimpses the show allows are almost uniformly post-mortem. Earth's in rubble, Earth's conquered, an Earth where the air itself has gone wrong, each one a planet's worth of catastrophe rendered as 3 seconds of scenery on the way to the next punch. The show is teaching, at speed, the scale of what the franchise's premise actually implies, that the worst case is not a possibility, it is the median, already realized, in bulk behind every green portal. The 3rd season's title cards would later glitch through the color schemes of alternate Invincibles as a standing reminder, the show's own logo refusing to let the audience forget the catalog. And the sequence carries one more quiet cruelty, a structural one. Mark sees those worlds too. The hero spends the back half of the finale being shown, world by world, what he statistically is, the empirical case against his own goodness, delivered at the exact moment he is fighting to protect the people who believe in it. The beating Angstrom administers is physical for one man and epistemic for the other, and the show, in its usual way, prices both. Mark wins the fight, loses the argument's comfort, and lands in the barren dimension carrying the tour with him, which is precisely why what happens there happens. The multiverse did not just witness the series' first killing, it helped argue for it. The silo broke the heroes' bodies, and the finale broke the hero's self-image. And between them, Season 2 completed the show's quiet relocation of its violence. The first season's horrors came from outside the family of protagonists, from a father revealed as an invader, from villains in basements. By the end of the second, the call was coming from inside the house, from the team's own complacency, from the hero's own hands. And the 3rd season, the one the fandom still talks about in the hushed tones reserved for television that actually hurt them, exists to ask the question that relocation demands. If the heroes can do this, what exactly is the difference between them and the people they fight? Season 3's answer takes the form of the most devastating hour the series has ever produced, and it is built, with the show's signature patience, out of a name the audience had been trained to skim past. A scientist, a widower, a man in the crowd at a memorial, Scott Duvall. The episode is called All I Can Say Is I'm Sorry. It is the 6th episode of Season 3. It was released on February 27th, 2025. And within days of airing, it was being discussed as the most devastating single chapter the series had ever produced. It contains no Viltrumites, no Empire, no Multiverse, no monster from beyond the sky. It contains a husband and wife, a little boy, and the longest invoice in the show's history finally arriving for payment. And to understand it, you have to go back 2 seasons to the Chicago fight, to the thousands of people who died as set dressing for a father's lesson. The show never treated them as set dressing, it was keeping a list. Scott Duvall was on it. Scott Duvall is a scientist with the Global Defense Agency, an ordinary, brilliant man in the basement levels of the show's machinery. And on the day Omni-Man taught his son about insignificance, Scott's sister and niece were among the insignificant. The episode shows you the moment with the economy of a nightmare, The two of them simply present in the city and then simply not two of the thousands. A statistic with faces only one man remembers. And the show's masterstroke, the decision that elevates the episode from tragedy to indictment, is where it points his grief. Scott does not blame Omni-Man, or not only, Omni-Man is gone, beyond reach, a god who left the courtroom. Scott blames the one who stayed, the son who fought his father through those streets, whose battle leveled those buildings, who walks free, celebrated, mourned for, while the people under the rubble got a memorial and a news cycle. Scott blames Invincible, and the series, which has spent 3 seasons making us love Invincible, has the nerve to let Scott's arithmetic be checkable. The fight did level the city. Mark's body was one of the 2 hammers that did it. The boy could not have stopped it, was himself a victim of it, all true, and his sister is still dead, and the show declines to tell you which of those truths outweighs the others. So Scott builds the instrument of his grief. He steals advanced biocapacitors from the agency he serves, augments his own body's ability to convert kinetic energy into electricity, and becomes Powerplex, a man whose power is, in the show's cruelest engineering joke, retaliation itself. He absorbs the force of every blow he takes and returns it as lightning. The harder you hit him, the more he has to hurt you with. The metaphor does not require unpacking. The show has built a villain whose physics are grief's physics, a man who turns damage received into damage dealt, and then it points him, fully charged, at the most damage-dealing being on the planet. His public challenge to Invincible is staged at a memorial for the Chicago dead, and the show twists the knife of timing. Mark, exhausted, trying for one night to be a person, is celebrating William's birthday and ignores the summons. The slight is unbearable precisely because it is reasonable. The hero takes one evening off, and the grieving man at the memorial reads the empty sky as the final confirmation that the people under the rubble never mattered at all. What happens from there has the structure of classical tragedy, every step locally sensible, the destination monstrous. Shapesmith answers the challenge in Mark's place and is beaten down by a man who only gets stronger when you fight him. Scott, fearing the agency's retaliation, runs home to his wife Becky and their son Jack, and the show gives the Duvall household real warmth, a marriage that works, a woman who knows what her husband has become and loves the man inside the armor of grief anyway. It is Becky, trying to save him, who proposes the staged kidnapping, let the world believe she and Jack are hostages, draw Invincible out, force the confrontation on Scott's terms, end it. And Mark comes. Of course Mark comes. He arrives not as an Avenger, but as the show's best self, patient, guilty, trying with everything he has learned across 3 seasons to talk a broken man down, telling Scott, in substance, that he is right to be angry, that Chicago haunts Mark too, that this fight will not return anyone. And Scott, whose whole body is a grief engine, attacks anyway, and the fight happens in the home, around the family, lightning answering force, force feeding lightning, until the discharge that was meant for Invincible finds the 2 people the armor of grief existed to honor. Scott kills Becky, Scott kills Jack. Not Omni-Man, not Mark. Scott, his own power, his own retaliation, arcing through his own family. The grief engine completing its circuit exactly where grief engines always complete it, at home. The show does not flinch from the aftermath, and the aftermath is the episode's verdict. Taken into custody, hollowed by a loss that now has no author but himself, Scott Duvall does not break toward clarity, he breaks deeper. He vows revenge on Invincible, still, again, harder, because the alternative, the true accounting, that his sister died by catastrophe, that his wife and son died by his own hand, is unsurvivable, and hatred of Mark Grayson is the only structure still holding his architecture up. The episode title is the show's bleakest joke and bleakest mercy at once. All I can say is I'm sorry is Mark's whole position, the position of a boy apologizing for a crime that is both his and not his at all, offered to a man for whom sorry is a currency from a country that no longer exists. The casting underlines how seriously the production took this hour, Aaron Paul voicing Scott with the cracked glass sincerity that made his television career, Kate Mara as Becky. Names announced in January of 2025 among the season's headline additions deployed for a single, self-contained, perfect devastation. The reason this episode sits at the center of tonight's catalog, the reason it may be the definitive going too far in the entire series, is that it is the one with no spectacle to hide behind, no city falls. The body count is 2, and the show has killed thousands without blinking. What the episode does instead is force the series' entire premise through the eye of one household. Every superhero story is built on collateral damage it asks you not to think about. Rubble that is just texture, crowds that exist to flee. This show spent 3 seasons keeping the receipts, and then it sent one receipt home with a face, a wife, a son, and a power source made of pain. And it let the bill destroy a family the audience had known for 40 minutes and will remember for years. The fandom calls Powerplex a villain. The show is very careful never to agree. He is the audit. He is what the Chicago fight looks like when it stops being a flashback and starts being a person, and the series, which had gone too far through fathers and empires and its hero's own hands, had finally gone too far through arithmetic alone. Grief in, lightning out. Nothing in the show's 4 seasons is more frightening than how little exaggeration that machine required. And the season was not done, because while Scott Duvall was burying his family, the man who had nearly beaten Mark to death in an empty dimension was finishing his own project, and his project was bigger than a household. Angstrom Levy had spent his recovery shopping across the multiverse, and what he bought, in bulk, was Mark's. The hour that follows the Powerplex episode is the largest catastrophe the series has ever staged. The day the sky filled with the hero's own face, and the fandom knows it by the name the show gave it, the Invincible War. What Have I Done? The 7th episode of Season 3, released on March 6, 2025, written by Robert Kirkman, opens with the attack already in motion, and the attack is the show's nightmare logic perfected. Portals tear open across the planet, every major city at once, and out of them come Invincibles. Not monsters wearing his colors, him. Variant marks harvested from the multiverse's worst timelines, the conquerors and family killers. Angstrom Levy spent a season collecting, dozens of them, loosed on one Earth simultaneously with 2 instructions that amount to the same thing: destroy the world, and do it wearing his face. The hour that follows is the largest sustained catastrophe the series has ever staged, and the show makes 2 choices that lift it beyond disaster spectacle into the going too far Hall of Fame. The first choice is scale rendered as intimacy. The episode does not montage the destruction, it visits it, city by city, defender by defender, and the global toll lands through specific bodies the audience knows. Earth's entire hero community is committed and overwhelmed. The Guardians take losses that the episode hands out with terrible evenness. Eve incapacitated, the roster wounded, Darkwing the Second presumed dead in the fighting, and the civilian arithmetic running beneath all of it. Hours of simultaneous urban warfare across every continent. A body count the show, once again, has the discipline to leave uncounted because counting would contain it. The second choice is the face. Every atrocity in the episode is committed by Mark Grayson's features, broadcast worldwide, and the show understands exactly what that does. Whatever the official explanations later, every survivor of the Invincible War will flinch at the real Mark for the rest of their lives. And the series, which had already given Mark the world's suspicion as Omni-Man's son, now hands him something no apology can reach: a planet's worth of trauma with his face printed on it. Angstrom's revenge was never the destruction, it was the printing. And inside the catastrophe, the show plants its single most discussed death, the one we have circled in other videos and arrive at properly now. Rex Splode, the team's redeemed jerk, the man who crawled back from a bullet through the skull and built himself into the Guardian's steadiest hand, holds a line against one of the variant Invincibles so that Rudy, Monster Girl, and Bulletproof can live. The variant is beyond him, and Rex knows it. The episode lets him know it visibly, and what he does with the knowledge is the entire argument of his 3-season arc compressed into one motion. Out of weapons, out of margin, he reaches into his own wound, takes hold of his skeleton, and detonates it, his power's final application. The explosive man spending the last matter he owns. The blast takes the variant with him. There is nothing left to recover, no body for the agency's corridors, no door for death to knock on. And the show, which had cried wolf with Kate and Ray and taught the audience to brace for the reveal, lets the silence hold. The funeral, at season's end, is real. Rudy taking the name Rex to carry forward is real. The fandom spent weeks in genuine mourning for a cartoon demolitions expert, and the mourning was the show collecting on 3 years of investment, the proof that its violence had been load-bearing all along. The episode's climax then pivots from war to verdict, and the verdict is the hour's quietest going too far. The surviving variant, Invincibles, defeated and cornered, turn on the man who recruited them, and Angstrom Levy, rather than be torn apart by his own weapons, strands them, opening a portal beneath the lot of them and dumping them onto a desolate, empty earth, his private prison of Marks, locked without trial in a dimension with nothing in it. And then he faces our Mark, expecting, the show suggests, some final symmetrical battle. And what he gets instead is a young man with nothing merciful left in the tank. Mark overpowers him and comes within a breath of finishing what he started in the barren dimension a season earlier, stopped not by principle, but by Angstrom's escape, the villain fleeing through his own portals, wounded, to the cybernetic surgeons who rebuilt him once before. The episode ends with its title hanging over both of them. What have I done is Angstrom's question, surveying a war that gained him nothing and cost a world everything. It is also Mark's kneeling in the wreckage of a planet that was attacked because of what his face means in 10,000 other universes. The show, with 4 seasons of practice, declines to answer for either of them. But the Invincible War's deepest cruelty is structural, and it only becomes visible at the episode's very end, because the war was not the season's final boss. It was the softening barrage. In the last minutes, with Earth's defenders dead, hospitalized, or hollowed out, with Mark himself run past every limit he has, a ship arrives, and out of it steps a Viltrumite the show had been saving, an aged, scarred, white-haired veteran with a prosthetic arm, and the unhurried manner of a man who has done this 10,000 times. Conquest, the Empire's auditor, come to evaluate Mark's progress conquering Earth, surveying the smoking planet with something like disappointment that the destruction was not Mark's doing. The cruelty of the timing is the entire point. The Empire's strongest soldier arriving at the exact hour the planet has nothing left to meet him with, and the season's penultimate image is Mark, bleeding, exhausted, abandoned by arithmetic, charging at a fresh apocalypse because the alternative is letting it walk toward his family. The show had gone too far for a full hour. The cliffhanger's promise was that it had been saving the real thing. And the real thing is what the next episode delivers. The season finale, The Fandom, immediately ranked among the greatest episodes the series had ever produced. The hour where the show finally cashed every check the first 3 seasons had written about what a fight between gods actually costs the ground they fight over. It is time for Conquest. I Thought You'd Never Shut Up, the 8th and final episode of Season 3, released on March 13th, 2025, written by Robert Kirkman, is, by the consensus of the audience that rated it, the finest hour the series has produced, the highest-rated episode in the show's history until Season 4's quietest chapter came for the silver medal. It is also, and these facts are not intention in this franchise, the most sustainedly violent episode the show has ever aired, the one where the series finally staged the full, uninterrupted answer to a question it had been deferring since the train tunnel. What does it actually look like when 2 beings at this power level genuinely try to kill each other, at length, near people? It looks like geography being rewritten. The Conquest fight is not staged in a city, it is staged through cities, plural, the 2 combatants traveling inside their own battle. And the episode's most radical choice is that it keeps cutting to the ground. The evacuations that do not finish in time, the skyline subtracting itself behind the punches. The show had spent 3 seasons teaching its audience that collateral is the real subject of every fight, through Chicago, through Powerplex, and the finale weaponizes the education, every wide shot arriving pre-grieved, the viewer doing the civilian arithmetic by reflex before the dust settles. Conquest himself is the perfect instrument for the lesson because, as his own introduction established, he is not here to win anything. He is here for the fight, an ancient soldier whose only remaining pleasure is resistance, which means the collateral is not incidental to his method. It is his method, every leveled block another lever to make the boy hit harder. The show built a villain who weaponizes the hero's love of bystanders, and then it spent an hour letting him pull the lever. And the damage the episode is actually interested in is the damage to the 3 people closest to the center. Oliver intervenes and is broken for it, a child's body-handed injuries. The show declines to soften the kid brother's first true lesson in what the family business costs. Eve intervenes, and the episode delivers the most harrowing image in the entire series, the one the fandom approached in the weeks after airing, the way you approach a hot stove. Conquest does not defeat Adam Eve. He destroys her bodily, on screen, injuries the show frames with just enough restraint to be airable and just enough honesty to be unbearable. and the audience watches the strongest woman in the series die past the point of any plausible rescue. What happens next we have examined from other angles on other nights, her power at the threshold finally turning inward, the subconscious wall coming down, a body rebuilt from the inside by its own authorship. Tonight, file it in the catalog where it belongs. The show went further with Eve's body in that sequence than it had ever gone with any hero, not to kill her, but to make her resurrection cost something to ensure that when she stood back up, remade, and burned the skin from Conquest's frame, the audience understood that the woman doing it had been, 90 seconds of screen time earlier, gone. Mark's half of the fight is the season's thesis coming home. He starts the battle empty, post-war, post-everything, and the episode strips even that from him, beat by beat, until what is left is the thing the series has been circling since the Baron dimension. A Grayson with nothing left but the willingness. The fight ends with Mark seemingly killing Conquest, and the show stages the seemingly with deliberate, terrible length. Not a clean blow, but a finishing. The kind of sustained, screaming, past-the-point violence the series had previously reserved for its villains, performed by its hero on a broken opponent in the ruins of a city, while the audience cheers and then hears itself cheering. It is the single most morally complicated, crowd-pleasing moment in the franchise. The episode knows exactly what it has done, and the proof is in the aftermath it chooses. No celebration, a hospital. Mark waking to learn the costs, Debbie at the bedside delivering the scene the season had been saving, a mother apologizing to her son for bringing him into a world that keeps doing this to him, and Mark, the boy who has now killed and meant it, telling her he does not blame her. The series' most violent hour resolves into its softest, and the whiplash is not a flaw. It is the show's whole grammar, stated one last time before the season ends. The week after the finale aired, the discourse around it was its own measurement of where the show had arrived. The episode shot immediately to the top of the series' rankings, the fandom and the entertainment press treating it as the new high watermark for what the medium could carry. And the conversation kept circling the same observation, that the hour's most extreme content, the destruction of Eve, the finishing of Conquest, had been received not as excess but as earned, the deposits of 3 seasons withdrawn in one night. A show that had spent years being asked whether it went too far had, by the spring of 2025, built an audience that measured its biggest episode by a different question entirely, whether the going too far had been paid for, and the consensus, visible in every ranking and rewatch thread since, was that it had. The fandom's standards had not loosened. They had been trained, scene by scene, funeral by funeral, into the exact instrument the show always intended its audience to become. An arbiter not of content, but of cost. Because the season does end with statements, 3 of them, quiet, administrative, and each one a going too far filed for future collection. Rudy renames himself Rex at the funeral, grief processed into identity, the kind of gesture the show makes you love before you notice how strange it is. Cecil, in the basement levels, reveals to Donald that Conquest is alive, comatose, secretly warehoused for interrogation beneath the planet he came to collect, the agency's drawer of monsters acquiring its crown jewel. No oversight, no disclosure, a Viltrumite stored under Earth like ordnance. And Mark, in the season's final scene, sits with Oliver and closes the arc the silo and the war and Conquest had been building, telling his little brother that Oliver had been right, that Mark understands now that anyone who threatens their family he will kill. The camera does not flinch and does not editorialize. The hero of the series ends its best season by adopting, in calm declarative sentences, the exact policy his father once tried to beat into him in a train tunnel, arrived at not through conquest but through love, and the show lets the season cut to black on the question of whether there is any difference. The fandom spent the hiatus arguing about it. The 4th season was built to make the argument worse, and the 4th season is where tonight's catalog has to go next, because the bill for the Conquest victory, the moral one and the planetary one, comes due across 8 episodes in the spring of 2026, and the collection agency is the Empire itself. The Viltrumite War arrives at last, and with it the strangest entry in this entire video, the moment the show went too far, not with a death, not with a battle, but with a peace. Season 4 premiered on March 18th, 2026 with its first 3 episodes, and the premiere, Making the World a Better Place, opens on something the series had never shown before. recovery, a world physically rebuilding from the Invincible War and the Conquest battle, and a hero who cannot. The season's early episodes are a portrait of Mark carrying the accumulated weight of everything this video has cataloged, and the show lets the carrying be visible, the hesitations, the guilt, the gap between the boy in the first episode and the young man the wars made. The fourth episode, Herm, opens with the confession scene the series had been owing its audience for 2 seasons. Mark unburdening himself to Art Rosenbaum, the old tailor receiving the full weight of what his best customer has done and survived, and comforting him and returning to him in the episode's gentlest gesture, his old suit, the bright one, the wish. Then the season sends him to actual hell in the same episode, an invented for television detour we have examined from other angles. And whatever you think of Satan and the Slayer needle drop, note what the detour contributes to tonight's catalog. The show literalized its hero's self-assessment. The boy who confessed in a tailor shop spends the next hour in the place confessions are supposed to send you. And the season structure, read this way, is a single sentence. He thinks he belongs there. The remaining episodes spend their runtime arguing with him about it. And the argument is conducted in the language this series has always argued in, escalating, planet-scale violence with family at the center. Because the Viltrumite War, promised since Season 1, finally arrives, and the show stages it as the genre's biggest events are staged, with one crucial inversion. The Empire is losing. The fearsome Viltrum Empire, revealed in another video's worth of detail to be a few dozen individuals wearing a galaxy's terror, is collapsing, and the season's middle episodes are the collapse. Open war between the coalition of planets and the Empire, the Battle of Tail Skria in the 6th episode, You Look Horrible, where Thragg's assault on the coalition's homeworld, enabled by a traitor inside the Alliance, is turned back when Mark, Nolan, and Oliver arrive together. 3 Graysons in a war line, the family that broke Chicago now holding the wall for civilization. The 7th episode, Don't Do Anything Rash, delivers the duel the franchise had been saving for years. Battle Beast against Thragg, the warrior who spent his life praying for a worthy death meeting the strongest Viltrumite alive. And alongside it, the season's great historical reveal, the flashback to Thetis assassinating Emperor Argal millennia ago, the founding murder of the entire galactic order. The episode ends with Thetis dead, the Coalition's ancient founder finally collected by the war he started, and Thragg unleashed, and the table set for a finale the fandom assumed would be the bloodiest hour the show had ever made. The war's worst day deserves its own page before the finale, because the too far of the Tail Skria battle is not its casualties. It is its cause. The Coalition's planetary defenses do not fail. They are lowered from inside by a traitor, and the traitor's identity lands as one of the season's true gut punches, one of the Data Twins. The Alliance's own information officers and his stated reasoning delivered to the heroes' faces is the most chilling sentence of the war. He sided with the Empire because he believed the Empire was going to win. No ideology, no grievance, no price. Just a forecast. The show has spent 4 seasons cataloging what strength does to its holders, and the Data Twin is its portrait of what strength does to spectators. The gravitational pull of inevitability, the quiet treason of the actuarial mind, and the season places his logic deliberately 2 episodes before its finale, so that when Mark stands in the sky running his own forecast against Thragg's ultimatum, the audience has already met the failure mode. The battle itself the show stages as the franchise's biggest, the Coalition's capital burning, Thetis and Alan and Telia and Zoe holding a collapsing line until the Graysons arrive out of exile to turn it. 3 of them, father and sons, the family that once broke a city, now the hinge of a galaxy. And the 7th episode collects the war's great duel and its great death. Battle Beast finally meeting Thragg, the warrior who spent centuries praying for a worthy ending, granted his audience with the strongest Viltrumite alive, and Thetis, the Coalition's ancient founder, finally collected by the rebellion he started millennia ago, with a blade and an emperor's back. The Empire's last war, the show keeps insisting through all of it, is not being fought over territory. It is being fought over forecasts, over which future is inevitable enough to defect to, and the season's finale is about to make its hero answer that exact question with a handshake. The finale is not that bloodiest hour. That is the point. Don't Leave Me Hanging Here, released April 22nd, 2026, commits the going too far that gives this entire video its strangest chapter, because the season's final violence is a sentence, calmly spoken. Mark, flying out over the city to clear his head, is met by Thragg, the real Thragg, unhurried, conversational, and the regent lays out the Empire's last position. There are 37 Viltrumites left. They are already on Earth. They have been here, dispersed among the population, indistinguishable, for longer than anyone knew. And the offer is this. The Empire will rebuild quietly through human bloodlines, harming no one, and in exchange, no one looks for them. Not Mark, not Cecil, not the Coalition. Any attempt to find or remove them converts every hidden Viltrumite into a weapon and the planet into a graveyard. And Thragg has the resume to make the conversion credible. The show gives Mark the visions it has been giving him all season, everyone he loves as red mist, the math his father once preached, now pointed at him as a hostage calculation. And Mark, the boy who said no in the train tunnel, who said no to Cecil, who has spent 4 seasons defining himself by the word, says yes. He takes the deal. The season ends with Earth intact, the war won on paper, and the planet quietly, secretly occupied, its protector now the custodian of the occupation's secrecy. Sit with what the show did there because it is the most sophisticated too far in the catalog. Every previous entry tonight was an action, a massacre, a maiming, a death. The finale's transgression is a surrender, staged as a rescue, and the audience reaction proved how precisely the show had calibrated it. The fandom did not erupt in grief, it erupted in argument because Mark's choice is simultaneously the most responsible decision any character has made in the series. Billions of lives weighed against pride, and the most complete victory the Empire has ever won. The conquest of Earth achieved at last, without a single building falling, by the simple mechanism of making the hero do the math. Nolan tried to conquer Earth with his hands and failed. Thragg conquered it with arithmetic in one conversation. The series, 4 seasons deep into teaching its audience that violence is the going too far, ended its biggest war by demonstrating that the furthest line of all gets crossed in a calm voice, mid-air, between 2 reasonable beings with nobody bleeding at all. And the post-credits scene sharpens the blade one final turn. On Telskria, Alan the alien, inheriting the Coalition's leadership, opens Thetis' final encrypted bequest and finds the dead founder's last work, a perfected scourge virus, the plague that once nearly ended the Viltrumite species, now refined into a finishing tool, accompanied by Thetis' conclusion that the universe will never be safe while any Viltrumite lives. Any. The category, as we have noted on another night, includes Nolan trying to be better, Oliver learning to be anything, Mark, the reason Earth is still breathing. The franchise's most openly genocidal proposition is authored by its most venerated pacifist and willed to its kindest character. And the season leaves the vial in Alan's hands and the deal in Mark's, 2 secrets, 2 arithmetics, aimed at each other across a galaxy, with Season 5 already commissioned to make them collide. The show's first too far was a father beating a son in front of a train. 5 years later, its instruments of horror are an inheritance and a handshake. That is either growth or decay, and the series, as is its lifelong custom, has declined to tell us which. But here's the thing. The 4th season's quiet apocalypse makes easy to forget, and the catalog would be dishonest without it. The heroes of this show have their own drawer in the too far cabinet, filled not by empires or madmen but by their own hands, on their own initiative, often with the audience half cheering. And before tonight winds down, we need to open it, because the entries in it are the reason the Thragg deal felt inevitable rather than shocking. The boy who said yes in the sky had been practicing. Open the hero's drawer, and the first entry is a child's. Season 3, Episode 3, You Want a Real Costume, right? The Mauler twins have seized a missile silo and are preparing an electromagnetic weapon that would cripple the world's communications, and the brothers Grayson respond together, Mark's first real mission with Oliver at his side. The Maulers are handled, the missile is destroyed, the day is, by every metric the genre keeps, saved. And then Oliver, Mark's little brother, a child the show has been carefully establishing as sweet, eager, and unsettlingly quick, kills them. Both Maulers. Deliberately, efficiently, against no immediate necessity, with Mark and Debbie's horror arriving after the fact, and his explanation, delivered with a child's unworried clarity, is that they were bad people, that they would only have escaped again, that this way they never hurt anyone else. The show does not let the moment be monstrous, which is what makes it unbearable. Oliver is not cruel. He is correct, by the cold ledger of the series' own history. The Maulers always escaped, always rebuilt, always cost more lives, and a 12-year-old ran the actuarial table the adults refused to run and zeroed it out. The fandom's argument about the scene lasted months. The show's own answer arrived at the season's end, as we have seen, when Mark told the boy he had been right. The drawer's first entry is not the child's kill, it is the adult's endorsement. The second entry belongs to Mark alone, and the show buried it inside its strangest episode. You Were My Hero, Season 3's 4th chapter, The Time Travel Hour. Fightmaster and Dropkick dragging Mark to the far future to face the Tyrant King the Immortal will someday become. Mad, eternal, begging through his rage for the one mercy time cannot give him. And Mark, after resistance, after horror, grants it. He kills the Immortal, the future version, a friend's ancient, ruined descendant, with his hands, as requested, and is returned to the present where the man he executed greets him, young and sane, at the next team briefing. The episode files itself away as a curiosity and is almost never discussed in the fandom's going too far conversations, and that omission is exactly why it belongs in tonight's catalog. Strip the time travel varnish and look at the bare event. Mark Grayson has performed a euthanasia killing of a teammate at the teammate's own future request and now carries the sense memory of it into every room they share. The series' most respectable kill is still a kill, and the show marked it quietly as another stone in the wall it was building episode by episode between the boy from Season 1 and the man who would someday shake hands with Thragg in the sky. The third entry is institutional, and we have touched its edges already tonight, but the catalog requires it stated whole. Season 3's opening hours kill heroes plural on the hero's own watch. Doc Seismic's assault in the premiere, an attack with giant burrowing creatures against Earth's defenders, succeeds in ways the show is blunt about. Mark and Eve failing to save lives they were present to save, defenders dying in the line, the kind of losses the series had previously reserved for the Guardians' worst nights, now distributed as the ambient cost of a Tuesday. And the GDA's response to the season's chaos, as we covered, was the skull implant, the White Room, the Reanimen, the slow conversion of protection into custody. The drawer's third entry is not one act but a posture, the hero's collective drift, after Chicago, after the war, toward the precautionary logic of the people they fight. And the show's third season is, on the structural level, one long document of that drift, ending with its hero promising murder in defense of family in his mother's living room, in the same calm register his father once used to describe humanity's insignificance. And the fourth entry is the one the show planted before any of the others, in the cold open of Season 2's premiere, and it reframes the entire drawer. A lesson for your next life begins on another Earth, a conquered one, cities in ruin, resistance crushed, and the conquerors are Mark and Nolan Grayson, side by side, the season opening inside the timeline where the train tunnel worked, where the boy said yes. The sequence exists on the surface to introduce Angstrom Levy and the multiverse stakes. What it actually installs permanently in the audience's nervous system is the knowledge that the hero's refusal was not a property of his character. It was an outcome, one branch of a probability tree whose other branches are almost uniformly monstrous. And every entry in the hero's drawer thereafter, Oliver's silo, the future immortal, the promise to kill, the Thragg deal, lands against that knowledge. The show is not asking whether its heroes can go too far. It opened a season by showing you the universe next door where they already did, wearing the same faces, speaking with the same voices, the going too far not as a line crossed but as a destination. The highway was always signposted toward, exits optional, and the 4 seasons since have been a documentary about a young man checking his mirrors at every exit. And so far, by margins, the show keeps narrowing, driving past. Which brings the catalog at last back to where the series itself began, because the drawer of heroic harms has a bottom layer, older than Season 3, older than the wars, laid down in the first season's quietest atrocities, the ones that were filed as plot beats at the time and only reveal their full weight in hindsight. It is worth ending the show's portion of tonight's catalog there, in the early hours with the entries everyone watched and almost no one counted. The file's oldest interplanetary page is the 4th episode of the first season, Neil Armstrong, Eat Your Heart Out, and it contains, hiding inside a breezy Mission of the Week structure, the first time the series ever staged murder as policy. The setup is almost quaint. Humanity's first crewed mission to Mars is launching. Cecil wants a superhero escort for it, and Nolan refuses the assignment with a line about his duty being to Earth. A refusal the season will later teach you to reread, so the job falls to Mark, a 17-year-old chaperoning 4 astronauts to another world as a resume builder. What the mission finds on Mars is the franchise's first true alien polity, and the show introduces it through an act of utilitarian coldness that most viewers, carried by the episode's comic pacing, file, and forget. The Martians abduct the astronaut crew, and the Martian Emperor, upon learning of the humans' presence, orders their execution. Not from malice, and the episode is careful about this, from arithmetic. Mars lives in terror of the Sequids, the parasitic swarm that infests their planet, a hive organism that needs only one suitable host to become unstoppable. And human physiology, unlike Martian shapeshifting, is suitable. 4 dead astronauts is, by the Emperor's math, the cheapest insurance in the galaxy, 4 lives against the universe. It is Cecil's arithmetic, it is Thaddeus's arithmetic, it is the arithmetic this entire catalog keeps meeting in better lit rooms, delivered here by a green monarch in the show's 4th hour, and the episode does not refute him. That is the uncounted part. The Emperor's math was right, and everything that went wrong because the math was interrupted. Because Mark rescues the astronauts, of course he does. That is the job. And the rescue is botched in the specific way that seeds one of the series' longest catastrophes. In the scramble, a Martian shapeshifter takes the place of one of the crew, the man who will call himself Shapesmith, abandoning his post and his planet for a tourist's dream of Earth. And the astronaut he displaces, the real Russ Livingston, is left behind on Mars, where the thing the Emperor feared finds the host it needed. The episode ends with the swap undetected and the series' fuse lit. And the show, in classic fashion, lets the fuse burn quietly across seasons through the Sequid invasion of Mars, through the space missions of Season 2, to the army of possessed humans massing behind Season 3's finale. Run the causality backward and the uncounted entry reveals its full shape. A teenager's moment of inattention, a shapeshifter's selfish wish, and a rescue conducted against the local government's explicit, correct warnings compounding across years into a threat aimed at the species. The show's first space adventure is, in hindsight, a procedural about how apocalypses are manufactured, by small failures in cheerful episodes, while the music still thinks everything is fine. And the episode's quietest entry is Nolan's, and it is the one the season was built to make you reread. He declined the Mars escort, his stated reason a hero's reason: Earth needs its strongest defender at home. The finale recontextualizes the refusal into its true shape, an Imperial officer declining to leave his post for an errand beneath his assignment. And suddenly the episode's entire comic premise, the boy on Mars doing his absent father's job badly, curdles into the season's thesis statement. The father was never doing the job at all. The job was always the boy's, undertrained, unready, learning planetary stakes by failing them, because the man the world trusted with those stakes had a different employer. The Uncounted File's oldest lesson is filed right there in episode 4, months before the massacre aired its truth. The show's most catastrophic going too far was never an action. It was an absence, 20 years long, wearing the world's most trusted smile, and every page of tonight's catalog descends from it. 1 episode later, the file gained its bloodiest early page, in a penthouse, at the hands of a bored lion, and the series learned how much its audience could actually take. The next page of the Uncounted File is episode 5 of Season 1, an hour whose title is the show winking at its own methods. That actually hurt. It is remembered as the Titan episode, the chapter where the stone-skinned enforcer cons Invincible into helping him topple the crime lord Machine Head, and as a heist story it is the season's lightest hour, right up until the doors of Machine Head's penthouse open and the hired security walks out. And the largest of them is a white-furred alien lion carrying a mace, and the episode stops being light, with a completeness that viewers in 2021 were not remotely prepared for. Battle Beast's introduction is, by design, the first time the series demonstrates the true width of its power scale, and it conducts the demonstration on the bodies of children. That is not rhetoric. Mark is 17. Monster Girl, by the cruelty of her own condition, fights in the body of a 12-year-old, and the show lets Battle Beast take them apart at length, with an indifference more frightening than rage. Mark's face broken against the floor, Monster Girl beaten past her transformations, her small human form left in a ruin. The episode photographs without mercy Black Samson, the powerless veteran in his armor, dismantled alongside them. The fight ends with the most insulting going too far in the early series. The Predator surveying the broken team, declaring the contest beneath him, and leaving disappointed, the maiming of 3 heroes filed by its own authors as a waste of his evening. The aftermath is the season's first real hospital vigil, the first time the show's bright suits sit in waiting rooms, the first time the audience learns that this series' injuries have durations, recoveries, relapses, that a beating in episode 5 is still being paid for in episode 6. The episode title was a promise, and the show has kept it for 5 years. It actually hurts, and it keeps hurting after the cut. And the fandom's entire relationship with this franchise's violence, the bracing, the dread, the gallows arithmetic, was installed in that penthouse by a bored lion. The uncounted file's next page belongs to the institutions, and it is the strangest entry in the early seasons because the show plays it as a beat of triumph. The kaiju. In the Season 1 endgame, with Omni-Man rampaging and every conventional response spent, Cecil Stedman reaches into the agency's contingency drawer and deploys, against Nolan, in the middle of populated terrain, a weaponized monster the size of a city block alongside Sinclair's early Reanimen. The audience cheers because the audience wants anything between Nolan and the Graysons, and the show counts on that want, and then it quietly files what just happened. The government's answer to a catastrophic threat was to introduce a second catastrophic threat into the same map, a creature whose own destructive footprint is measured in neighborhoods spent purely to buy minutes. It is the first appearance of the arithmetic that will define Cecil for 3 seasons, harm pre-authorized in units of lesser than, and the show stages it so smoothly inside the season's most desperate hour that almost nobody in the audience files it at all. That is the real lesson of the uncounted entries. The series does not hide its institutional horrors, it times them, placing each one at the exact moment the audience is most grateful for it, and then it waits, seasons sometimes, for you to remember what you cheered. And the early file closes with the entry that taught the show how to do everything we have covered tonight. The maiming that proved injuries could be permanent narrative real estate. Rick Sheridan and the Reanimen we have given their due. But sit for one more minute with the Silo's predecessor in miniature, the simple fact established across the first season's back half that this show's heroes spend a startling fraction of their screen time in recovery. Mark loses a week to Battle Beast and most of a month to his father. Monster Girl's convalescence stretches across episodes, and her every future transformation, the show reminds us, spins her backward toward childhood, healing itself converted into a slow harm. The immortal is twice resurrected and twice wrong. By the time Season 1 ends, the series has quietly established the rule that no other superhero adaptation of its era was willing to carry. That the body keeps the score and the schedule keeps the body, and every going too far in the seasons that followed, every silo and war and conquest, lands on an audience that learned, in these early uncounted hours, to dread the waiting room as much as the battlefield. The file has one more early page, and it belongs to the Empire's first emissaries, the ones who arrived before the war did, with offers instead of armadas, and the way the show staged their visits is its own quiet chapter of the catalog, because the too far they carried was not violence at all. It was pressure applied to a teenager in the sky alone. Her name is Anissa. She arrives in the back half of Season 2, voiced by Chantel Van Santen, and her assignment, stated in the show's own terms, is to check on Invincible's progress in taking over Earth. The Empire, at this point in the story, still believes Mark can be salvaged for the cause, and Anissa is the salvage inspector. The encounter the show builds around her is one of the most discussed sequences of the season, and it earns its place in tonight's catalog through a mechanism the series had not used before. It is a beating administered as a performance review. The shape of the scene is what makes it linger. Anissa does not arrive in rage. She arrives on schedule, professional, almost courteous, and she talks to Mark the way head office talks to a branch that is underperforming. The expectations, the timelines, the disappointment. And when he refuses the premise, she demonstrates the org chart, physically, at length, with a one-sidedness the show renders in full. Mark, who has by this point in the series survived his father and a Viltrumite war party on Thraxa, cannot touch her. The fight, if it can be called one, establishes that the Empire's mid-level personnel outclass Earth's strongest defenders so completely that the entire planet's security has been this whole time a matter of imperial scheduling. But the deeper, too far in the sequence is the frame around the violence. Anissa's pressure on Mark is the Empire's breeding program logic, personalized, the expectation that he will do his part for the species, delivered with a physical dominance that gives the conversation a coercive charge. The show does not dilute and does not name, and the audience that knows the comics felt the temperature of the scene immediately. The series, as we will discuss before the night ends, has so far declined to adapt what the source material eventually does with this character. What it has already adapted in that mid-air conference is the architecture of the threat, a being who outpowers the hero absolutely, speaking the language of obligation, with the Empire's full institutional weight behind every quiet sentence. No blood is spilled that matters. It is one of the heaviest scenes in the season anyway, and the show knows exactly why, and so does everyone watching with the page numbers in their memory. The uncounted file also keeps a wing for the crimes the Capes never see. And Season 3's 5th episode, This Was Supposed to Be Easy, is its showcase. While the season's main line marches toward Powerplex and the war, the episode drops into the underworld the show has maintained since Titan's first con, and conducts, in subplot, a small masterclass in casual brutality. Mr. Liu, the dragon-summoning crime lord of the Order, pressures Titan with the oldest leverage in the genre, comply or the family dies, and the show lets the threat against Titan's wife and daughter sit there with full weight, the stone enforcer who once outplayed Invincible reduced to a man doing hostage math about his own kitchen. The episode's climax then delivers the most efficient too far in the season's quietest storyline. Machine Head, the auto-tuned boss the audience remembers as Season 1's comic relief villain, freed in the chaos of a prison breakout, repays Liu's machinations by shooting him, point blank, mid-sentence, a murder conducted with the bored efficiency of a man closing a browser tab. Liu survives it, the show reveals in time by means as strange as everything else about him, but the scene's information is already delivered. The criminal ecosystem under this show's superhero world runs on a violence that has no rules of engagement at all. No Viltrumite codes, no agency oversight, just leverage and proximity, and the heroes, occupied with gods, police almost none of it. The people Titan once told Mark the Capes never protect are still unprotected 3 seasons later, and the show keeps that ledger too, quietly, in episodes the recaps barely mention. And note, before we leave the uncounted file, the entry that connects it to everything above it, because the show made the connection itself in Season 4's early episodes. Mr. Liu, alive, resurfaces, pursuing old debts, the underworld's grudges persisting across the same years in which empires rose and wars were won, and the persistence is the point. The series' cosmic stories resolve, its street stories just continue, generation after generation of leverage and payback, indifferent to whatever happened in the sky that week, and read this way, the show's underworld is its most honest mirror. The Viltrumite Empire, for all its terror, can be defeated, bargained with, ended. The ordinary human appetite for power over other humans the show has been quietly insisting since Titan first smiled at Mark, cannot. It just changes management. The oldest pages of the uncounted file, though, sit further back than any of this, in the first season's 7th hour, in scenes the fandom has clipped for memes so many times that their actual content has gone strangely unexamined. It is time to read them properly. Go back to the 7th episode of Season 1, We Need to Talk, and watch it knowing everything you now know. The episode contains the moment the show's first season had been building toward, the end of Nolan's cover, and the staging of it is a double atrocity the fandom rarely itemizes. Debbie, having learned the truth, has been relocated to the protection of the Global Defense Agency, and it is from inside that protection, on the agency's own screens, that she and Cecil watch Nolan come for the evidence trail, and the evidence trail is people. Nolan kills Donald Ferguson, Cecil's right hand, the audience's favorite calm administrator, and several GDA agents with him on camera, while the man's colleagues and the dead man's friends watch the feed, helpless, and while a wife watches her husband do it. The series had shown worse carnage by volume. It had never shown an execution witnessed live by the victim's co-workers and the killer's spouse. Grief and proof arriving in the same frames. Donald's later resurrection, the robotic rebuild we have examined on other nights, softens nothing about the scene as aired, because nobody watching it on either side of the screen knew a rebuild was coming. The show let a beloved character die horribly in front of the people who loved him, And then it let the audience sit with that for episodes before opening the drawer where the agency keeps its miracles. The same episode then stages the franchise's first public killing, and it is the hinge on which the entire series turns. The Immortal, resurrected by the Mauler twins, enraged and uncontrolled, flies at Nolan to avenge the Guardians, and Nolan kills him for the second time, in open daylight, with news helicopters broadcasting the murder transmitted live to every screen on the planet. The world learns what Omni-Man is not through investigation, not through confession, but by watching him tear a beloved hero apart on the morning news. And the show lingers on the reaction shots, the anchors, the streets, the species. Wide realization arriving in real time. Tonight's catalog has featured planets and wars, but in terms of pure psychological damage per second, the televised killing of the Immortal may be the most efficient too far the show has ever staged. The moment an entire fictional civilization's trust died on camera, and the moment the audience understood that this series would let the worst possible version of events happen in public, unmanaged, with no narrative cushioning between the atrocity and the millions watching it. And feeding into that hinge are the first season's two great unexamined desecrations, the ones the show files as villain logistics and never asks you to mourn. The Mauler twins, to manufacture their weapon against Nolan, exhume the Immortal. The show states it plainly in its 6th episode, the clones digging up the corpse of the Guardians' leader, the man already murdered once, to resurrect him as an enthralled instrument, a dead hero recycled into ordnance by men who saw a grave and read inventory. It is grave robbery, reanimation without consent, the conversion of a person into equipment, played as a subplot, and the casualness is the horror, because the casualness is the point the season is quietly accumulating, that in this universe, a body, even the most venerated body on Earth, is a resource the unscrupulous will spend. Cecil's agency, the audience eventually learns, runs on a politer version of the same accounting. The Maulers just skip the paperwork. And one episode earlier than that, in the show's 2nd hour, the series had already staged its first off-screen genocide and dared you to notice Nolan in what is framed as a heroic retaliation, following the Flaxan invaders home through their portal and devastating their civilization. An entire dimension's worth of cities broken by one man in an afternoon that, given the time differential we have discussed on other nights, lasted months on their side of the door. The episode plays it as a victory beat. Run the arithmetic, and it is Thraxa before Thraxa, the first time the show let its most charismatic figure commit an atrocity at species scale while the score told you he was winning. The first season, watched in hindsight, is salted with these. Harms filed under plot, cruelties amortized into world building, and the show's long game has been to come back for every single one of them with interest in the seasons since. Even the franchise's gentlest release carries one of its heaviest entries, and it deserves its place in the catalog before we leave the screen for the page. The Adam Eve Special, the standalone prequel released on July 21st, 2023, looks, from its marketing, like a young heroine's origin story and is, in its content, the darkest single document in the television canon. A government program engineering a child weapon, a birth mother, Polly, held and experimented on for 18 years. A conscience-stricken scientist hiding the weapon in a grieving family's crib. And at the story's center, the program's later attempts to recreate its success, a group of children, deformed, degrading, dying of their own engineered biology, deployed as weapons against the very girl they were failed copies of. Their deaths arriving not in battle so much as in expiration, small bodies reaching the end of warranties nobody designed past. The special ends with the program's enforcer murdering both the scientist and the mother, the two keepers of Eve's truth, and with Eve's response, the memory erasure we have weighed elsewhere, mercy and unmaking in a single gesture. All of it, every beat, released as a surprise summer treat in the franchise's bright pink palette, and received warmly by a fandom that has long since stopped expecting this series to spare anyone on account of their age, their innocence, or the color scheme of their poster. The show goes too far in its main line as event. The special proved it goes too far at rest, by default, as a baseline, even in the corner of the franchise built for newcomers. And the first season's 7th hour, the one the memes mined hollow, is not even done with us yet. Read them properly, and the 7th episode of Season 1 turns out to hold one more entry, the one the memes have hidden in plain sight for 5 years, and it is not a killing at all, it is a sentence. The episode's events, the murder of Donald, the televised destruction of the immortal, end Nolan's 20-year performance. And with the mask finally off, the show gives him his first honest conversation in 2 decades, and the person he has it with is the world, via news helicopter. And the person it is aimed at is his wife. Asked in effect what Debbie was to him all those years, the man who's about to beat his son half to death reaches for a word, and the word is pet. The line became a meme within days of airing, the way this franchise's wounds always do, and the meme has spent 5 years sanding the horror off it, so let tonight restore the grain. A woman watched live on a government monitor while her husband of 20 years, the father of her child, the man whose breakfast she had made that morning, described their marriage as ownership of an animal. The show then spent 3 seasons documenting what that sentence did, the drinking, the grief that had no socially legible category, widowed by a living man, mourning a marriage that the other party had just publicly reclassified as a hobby. And the series' long game with the line is the most patient thing in this entire catalog, because everything Nolan does afterward, the tears he cannot explain on Thraxa, the love he keeps failing to renounce, the man who could not finish the lesson in the tunnel, exists to prove the sentence false, and the show never once lets him take it back. There is no scene, 4 seasons later, where the word is unsaid. Debbie rebuilt a life, Nolan crawled towards something like decency, and the sentence just sits there in the archive permanently. The cruelest thing anyone in this series has ever said, outlasting every wound the show ever drew in blood. The series knows something the genre mostly does not, that the body heals on the show's schedule, but a sentence heals on the listeners, and some sentences never do. That is the first season's real legacy to the catalog, the discovery that the show's deepest violence was always verbal, parental, domestic, and that the gore was the delivery system rather than the payload. Look back across tonight from here and the pattern is everywhere. The train tunnel's horror is the lecture, not the train. Anissa's menace is the conversation, not the beating. Thragg's conquest is a quiet talk in the sky. Powerplex's tragedy detonates in a living room between a husband and a wife, in words before it ever arcs into lightning. The show went too far with bodies so reliably that the fandom built its whole reputation on the blood. And underneath, all along, the series was conducting its actual business in kitchens and corridors, in the things fathers say to sons and husbands say about wives, and the bodies were just where the sentences landed. And maybe that is why the entry the whole world knows best, the meme of all memes, the bloodied father holding his broken son and demanding that he think, has survived 5 years of being a joke without losing an ounce of its weight for the people who have actually seen the episode. The image is funny everywhere except in context. In context, it is a parent demanding that a child agree with the worldview that is currently breaking his bones, the conversion of love into pressure into violence, the entire catalog of this video compressed into one frame. The internet laughs at it, the way the internet laughs at everything it cannot hold. And every week, a few thousand more people, led in by the joke, press play on the episode and meet the frame in its habitat, and go quiet and understand. The meme is the show's strangest distribution network, the going too far traveling the world disguised as a punchline, delivering the full weight on arrival to anyone who follows at home, which leaves only the source material, the 144 issues the entire catalog descends from, and the comic's reputation precedes it for good reason. However far you think the show goes, the book went further, and before tonight ends, we owe the page its chapter, including the one page above all the others, the most controversial thing this franchise has ever published, and the question the adaptation has been quietly circling for 4 seasons. The Invincible comic ran from January of 2003 to February 14th, 2018, 144 issues, written from first to last by Robert Kirkman, drawn principally by Cory Walker and then Ryan Ottley, and its standing reputation among comics readers has 2 halves. The first half is that it is one of the best superhero serials ever published. The second half is that it is, page for page, more brutal than the television series has yet dared to be, and the readers who say so are not exaggerating for clout. The show compresses, reorders, and in several documented cases, softens. The book, publishing monthly with no standards department and no platform to answer to, went wherever its author pointed it for 15 years, and tonight's catalog has to end there because several of its entries are still sitting in the source material like unexploded ordnance, waiting on adaptation decisions that have not been announced. The arcs the show has already adapted give you the calibration. The comics version of the Conquest battle is, if anything, harder than the screens. Eve's fate at Conquest's hands, rendered on the page with a finality the show translated but did not exceed. The comic's Invincible War levels its cities with the same industrial indifference. The comic's Angstrom beating, its silo, its train, all present, all ancestral, the show's most notorious sequences revealed as faithful covers of 15-year-old songs. Where the book pulls ahead of its adaptation is in duration and aftermath. Monthly publishing let wounds stay open for years of real time. Heroes maimed in 2009 still carrying the damage in 2012, and the book's signature move, even more than the show's, was the refusal of the reset button, injuries compounding, traumas accruing interest, the cast aging through their own consequences. Readers did not call the comic dark because of any single page. They called it dark because it kept books, 15 years of books. And then there is the page. Issue 110, published in April of 2014, the single most controversial object the franchise has ever produced, and the entry in tonight's catalog that the entire fandom has spent 5 years watching the adaptation approach. I will describe it the way the record describes it, carefully and without decoration. Mark, at one of the lowest points of the series, is confronted by Anissa, the Viltrumite warrior, over his refusal to participate in the Empire's breeding imperative. He refuses her. She does not accept the refusal. She overpowers him and she rapes him on the page while he says no, and the issue presents it without ambiguity as to what is happening. The reaction in 2014 was immediate and severe. Essays, retailer commentary, industry argument about whether sexual violence of any framing belonged in a mainstream superhero book, compounded by the gender reversal and by what many critics identified as the deeper failure, the aftermath, the book's perceived underweighting of the assault in the issues that followed, the story continuing at serial pace while the wound the story had just inflicted seemed to many readers insufficiently tended. Kirkman's stated reasoning is on the record from that spring, that the development had been long planned, that he was placing his protagonist in the worst circumstance he could conceive and examining what came out the other side. The defense persuaded some readers, the criticism persuaded others. The argument has never closed, and it migrated, fully formed, into the television era, where it now functions as the adaptation's most closely watched open question. Because the show, 4 seasons in, has not adapted it, and the show has Anissa, voiced, present, recurring, written with a depth the comic never gave her, and every season that passes deepens the question of intent. The series has demonstrably softened her. The confrontations she and Mark have had on screen, brutal as they are, have stayed on this side of the line, and entertainment press coverage across seasons 3 and 4 openly debated whether the storyline should be adapted at all, with prominent outlets arguing the series does not need its source's most horrific arc. Nothing official has been announced in either direction, and I will not pretend to know. What can be said, as observation rather than prophecy, is that this franchise's adaptation has never yet flinched from the source's violence, and has also never yet treated the source as binding. In issue 110 is the precise coordinate where those two track records collide. Either choice, made publicly, will be the biggest adaptation decision in the show's history. The fandom knows it. The silence around it, from a production that comments on everything, suggests the production knows it too. The comic holds other unfilmed entries the catalog should name without detonating. The book's later run contains a sustained stretch, well documented among readers, in which a hero's conquest of Earth actually succeeds for a time. Governance by force, dissent managed, the story living inside an occupied planet far longer than television pacing would ever tolerate. It contains mutilations of major characters that persist for years of publication. It contains, in its final movement, a war resolved by means the show has already begun seeding, and an ending, much disputed, much loved, that follows its hardest material with its warmest. A generational coda whose gentleness lands, for many readers, precisely because of everything it survived. The comic's full reputation, the one the show's viewers inherit secondhand, is not that it went furthest. It is that it went furthest and then came home. That 15 years of escalation resolved not into nihilism but into family, and that the going too far, all of it, every issue of it, turned out to be load-bearing for one of the most earnest endings in the medium. The show has 5+ announced seasons of road between here and there. The book is the map, annotated, bloodstained, and sitting on the production's desk. The paper trail around that issue is its own document of how far the franchise had gone. In the spring of 2014, the comics press ran interviews framing the development as controversial and game-changing in the same headline. Opinion essays appeared asking in plain words whether rape has a place in comics at all, and the conversation spilled past the medium's usual walls into general entertainment coverage. A decade later, the television era reopened the file from the other side, with mainstream outlets publishing pieces arguing the adaptation should skip the storyline entirely, that the series does not need its source's most horrific arc, speculation features handicapping the production's intentions, explainers introducing the controversy to audiences who had never read a page. One comic published 12 years ago, still generating advance coverage for television seasons that have not aired. Nothing else in the franchise's archive, not the Massacre, not the Train, not Conquest, carries that kind of half-life, and the reason is the one this catalog has circled all night. The show's other extremities are violences of the body, and the audience has made its peace with how this series handles bodies. The page in question is a violence of a different order, and everyone, the fandom, the press, and by every visible sign, the production itself understands that adapting it, or refusing to, will be the most consequential, line-drawing exercise in the show's history. So the source material's lesson, the one the adaptation has internalized so thoroughly that it functions as house style, is the lesson tonight's whole catalog has been circling, and it is time to land on it. The franchise goes too far on purpose, by design, as methodology, and it has been telling us why for 20 years in interviews, in structure, in the placement of every wound. We should let it make its closing argument. Before the closing argument, though, the catalog owes a chapter to the harms with no blood in them at all, because the show's quietest going too far has always been psychological, and its longest-suffering target has no powers and never throws a punch. Debbie Grayson's seasons-long ordeal is the series operating at its most patient and most merciless. Count what the show asks her to survive on screen. The discovery, alone with no agency support and no superpowers, that her husband of 20 years is a mass murderer and an alien advance agent. A discovery she has to carry through ordinary days, selling houses, making dinner, while deciding what to do with it. The broadcast, watched live, of that husband declaring her something like a pet. The crater where her family was, and the bottle she crawls into. The show depicting her drinking and her depression across season 2 with a fidelity most dramas about ordinary grief never attempt, let alone superhero cartoons. The support group of superhero widows and widowers where she goes seeking the one thing left, company in the wreckage, and where the show stages one of its cruelest small scenes, a grieving widower named Theo extending her his warmth right up until he learns whose wife she was, and withdrawing it in front of her, the world's judgment of Nolan landing on the woman Nolan victimized most. And then, the request, the baby. Raise the child of the man who broke you, the child of the marriage that replaced you, because there is no one else in two worlds who can. She says yes. The series never frames any of this as spectacle, which is precisely why it belongs in the catalog. The show went further with Debbie's interior than it ever went with anyone's body, season after season. And the fandom's consensus that she is the strongest person in the cast is not sentiment, it is the audit. The same wing of the catalog holds Mark's own season 2, the stretch the fandom remembers as the quiet ruin. The show lets the Chicago aftermath actually cost him, the strained return to school, the relationship with Amber distorting under the weight of secrets and absences until it fails, the friendships fraying, the boy spreading himself across a planet's emergencies while his own life quietly forecloses. And all of it conducted under the world's suspicion, the son of the traitor, watched by the immortal, measured by the agency, his every flight shadowed by the question of whether he is his father with better manners. No single scene of it would make a highlight reel. The accumulation is the harm, and the show renders accumulation the way almost nothing animated ever has, as schedule, as fatigue, as a 17-year-old's calendar with no white space left, and the audience watched 2 seasons of it knowing, from the cold open of the season, that the alternate version of this exhausted boy, the one who stopped trying, was sitting on a conquered earth feeling fine. The series, read this way, went too far with Mark not in any tunnel or crater, but in the slow, administrative grinding of his youth, and the wars merely collected what the grind had prepared. And one more bloodless entry, the strangest one, the one still in motion, the Sequids. The parasite swarm that took the real astronaut Russ Livingston on Mars has spent the season since building toward Earth. And the Season 3 finale's tally of gathering storms included Russ assembling an army of sequid-possessed humans, thousands of bodies, walking, coordinating, planning, with nobody home inside any of them. The show has staged possession before, but the scale of what it is assembling is a different category of horror. Consent harvested by the city, individuality deleted in bulk, and it is being grown patiently in the background of episodes about other things in exactly the way this series grows everything it intends to detonate. The catalog cannot file the sequid invasion yet. It can note from 20 years of franchise behavior that the show does not build a horror this carefully without intending to go too far with it, and that the fandom's calmest viewers are the ones who have not done the math on what a battle against possessed civilians will require the heroes to do. Every previous war in this series was fought against enemies. The one in the pipeline appears designed to be fought against victims, and the show has never once, in its entire run, declined a moral trap it spent that long constructing, which is the deepest pattern in tonight's whole catalog when you stand back from it. The slow fuse, Powerplex was seeded in Season 1's finale and detonated in Season 3. Sinclair's government contract was signed in the closing minutes of Season 1 and came due 2 seasons later in Mark's skull. Dark Blood was exiled in Season 1 and opened Hell's Door in Season 4. Conquest was warehoused in the Season 3 finale, and ticks under the planet still. The Thraxan attack waited a season for Nolan's sentence, the Anissa question has waited 4 for its answer, and the Scourge virus sits in Alan's keeping with Season 5 already commissioned. This show goes too far the way geology goes too far, pressure banked for years per event, and the audience has learned to read the seeding the way the characters never can, which converts every quiet episode into suspense and every kindness into a down payment. Other series shock you in the moment. This one shocks you in the future tense, files the receipt in plain sight, and lets you spend 2 years knowing the bill exists without knowing the amount. It is the most patient cruelty on television, and it is somehow also the gentlest, because nothing in it ever comes from nowhere. The wolf is always announced. The flock just keeps hoping. And the show has built 5 years of devastating television out of exactly that hope. Hope is also why this show's funerals work, and the funerals deserve their own page before the catalog closes, because they are the instrument that converts everything else in tonight's video from spectacle into weight. This series stages more mourning than any action property of its era, and it stages it with a craftsman's specificity. Go back to the 3rd episode of the 1st season, Who You Calling Ugly, the Guardians' funeral episode, and notice the show's first great structural choice about grief. There are 2 services, the televised one, the state spectacle, the world mourning its pantheon in broadcast language, and then the private burial, the small one, where the families stand at the actual graves and where the show conducts its real business. Dark Blood prowling the mourners with his suspicions, Nolan delivering graveside courtesies an inch from the people he widowed, Olga's face, the children. The series understood 3 episodes into its existence that public grief and private grief are different institutions, and it has kept the 2 ledgers separate ever since. The memorials and the kitchens, the statues and the support groups. And the funerals are where the show's going too far pays its taxes. Rex's funeral at the end of Season 3 is the demonstration case. The series had just staged its biggest war and its hardest death, and it closes the season not on the battle's scale, but on the burials, the surviving guardians around a grave. Rudy's renaming of himself the only eulogy the episode needs. Grief processed into inheritance in a single quiet sentence. Compare the texture of that scene against the franchise's reputation, the gore clips, the meme stills, the fighting game fatalities, and you can see the full machine the show has been running since 2021. The violence is the loud half of a transaction whose quiet half is always collected later at gravesides, in waiting rooms, at kitchen tables. And the series' actual artistic wager, the one this entire catalog has been documenting, is that audiences will accept almost any extremity on the front end if the back end is honored honestly. 5 years of evidence says the wager was right. The episodes the fandom rates highest are disproportionately the ones about the back end, the aftermaths, the confessions, the quiet hours, a pattern that reached its statistical peak in Season 4 when Give Us a Moment, an episode built almost entirely from connection and repair, scored as the second highest rated chapter in the franchise's history, bested only by the Conquest finale it was healing from. The audience's own scoreboard, read plainly, says the violence was never the product. It was the price, and the product was always the mattering. That is also, I think, why the show's rare missteps in this territory sting the fandom so specifically. When a death is walked back too easily, the audience reacts not with relief, but with something closer to betrayal, because a resurrection spends the mattering, devalues the grief the show taught them to invest. The series learned that lesson across the Kate and Ray fakeouts and answered it with Rex, as we covered from another angle on another night, and the funerals have held their weight since. A franchise this violent survives on exactly one commodity: the audience's belief that the wounds are real, and every burial the show stages correctly is a deposit into that belief. And every cheat is a withdrawal, and the production behaves observably like it knows the account balance to the decimal, which leaves the ones who walk away from the graves, the survivors. The show keeps a ledger for them too, and it is the gentlest cruel document in the whole archive. And Hope, in this series, has a casualty list of its own, which is the last wing of the catalog before the closing argument, the one almost nobody itemizes because its entries are officially the good news, the survivors. This show's signature mercy, the death walked back, the body recovered, the hero who lives, is also, examined honestly, its subtlest form of going too far, because the series has never once let survival be free, and the price tags it attaches to its good news are some of the heaviest writing it does. Walk the Ward. Rick Sheridan survives Sinclair's table, and his survival is a years-long reconstruction, a young man relearning himself inside a body that is partly an artifact. His recovery depicted across seasons with relapses. The show refuses to rush Loved the Entire Way by William, and harder to watch for exactly that reason. Shrinking Ray survives the inside of Komodo Dragon, and the show brings her back not triumphant but altered. A hero who has been prey, whose next decisions about the work, the retirement conversation with Rex, the show frames as the entirely sane response to what survival actually felt like. Rex himself survives a bullet through the skull and spends episodes reassembling, the team's fastest mouth moving carefully, and the show's decision to give him that long, humbling middle passage is the only reason his ending, when it comes in the war, lands as triumph instead of waste. Donald survives his own death so many times that survival becomes his crisis, the rebuilt man auditing his own continuity in scenes that play deliberately like grief from the inside. Black Samson survives Battle Beast at the cost of weeks in the dark, and comes back changed in the strangest direction, his powers returning through the wreckage. Monster Girl survives everything the show throws at her, and her every survival, by the arithmetic of her curse, is paid for in reverse. The body that endures the battle growing younger toward a horizon nobody discusses at team meetings. Even Mark's survivals, all of them, the Train, Thraxa, Angstrom, Conquest, are cataloged by the series as accumulating weight, hospital ceilings he has memorized, a body that keeps being rebuilt around a self that keeps the records. The argument here, and I will flag it as the essay's reading, is that this is the show's deepest discipline, the place its reputation for cruelty inverts into something closer to reverence. Most action stories abuse survival, spending it like loose change, the hero fine by the next scene, the cost waved off in a sling and a joke. This series prices survival honestly, which means its mercies hurt, which means, strangely, that its mercies are believable, and the audience's trust in the show's gentleness is built on the same foundation as its dread. When this show lets somebody live, it means something, because living here is depicted as work, slow, unglamorous, relational work, Williams bringing breakfasts, teams sitting in waiting rooms, mothers managing recoveries between their own. The going too far and the coming back from it are one continuous instrument, and the series plays both ends of it with the same unblinking attention. That, more than any single atrocity, is what the imitators that followed this show into the prestige violence space have never managed to copy. Anyone can spend a body. This series is the only one in its genre that consistently shows you the receipt for keeping one. There is one more export of the show's violence worth a minute because it completes the strange picture of what this franchise's brutality became in the wider culture. In November of 2023, Omni-Man was added to Mortal Kombat 1 as a playable guest fighter, J.K. Simmons reprising the voice, the character's fatalities lovingly assembled from his most infamous atrocities in the series, the Train among them. The crossover was a delight to most fans and a small philosophical event for the rest. because it held the franchise's two relationships with its own violence side by side with no narrative tissue between them. In the show, the violence is mourned, audited, priced. In the export, the violence is the product, replayable, scored, sold, the lesson of the train tunnel converted into a finisher you can perform on demand. Nothing about that is scandal. Every violent franchise lives this double life. But it is clarifying. The same images, with the consequences removed, become entertainment of a completely different species. And the distance between Mortal Kombat's Omni-Man and the shows is, in the end, the cleanest measurement available of everything this video has been about. The going too far was never the images. It was always the meaning the show refused to let the images escape from. Strip the meaning, and the most harrowing television of its era becomes a toy. Keep it, and a cartoon about a flying teenager becomes the genre's conscience, which is the thought that brings the catalog at last to its closing argument, the one the people who make this show have been giving for years in pieces, and the one the show itself gives wordlessly in its construction every single week. So here's the closing argument, the one the people who make this show have been giving in pieces for years, and the one the show itself gives every single week in its construction. When showrunner Simon Ratzioppa was pressed about the Season 2 violence, his answer, documented in interviews from November of 2023, was not an apology and not a boast. It was physics. The show keeps asking what would really happen if beings like this fought near beings like us, and the answer, he said in substance, is that if Superman punched you, you would explode. The violence is not an exaggeration laid over the premise. It is the premise, told honestly for the first time, and every sanitized superhero fight you have ever enjoyed was the exaggeration. The lie of the bloodless city battle, the skyscraper that falls on nobody. This series went too far by the genre's standards, by deciding the genre had never gone far enough to be true. And the truth-telling has rules, which is the part the imitators never learn. Go back through everything in tonight's catalog and notice what is never there. The camera never lingers in delight. The suffering is never the reward, never the texture, never the point of sale, whatever the brand's fighting game cameos might suggest. Every horror is attached to a consequence, every consequence to a person, every person to a cost. The show then actually pays, in funerals that hold, in grief departments that stay funded, in heroes who change permanently because of what they did and saw. The show goes too far the way surgery goes too far, past the skin, on purpose, with intent to treat something underneath. And the thing underneath has been the same in every entry tonight. The question of what strength owes the breakable. Nolan answered it wrong in a train tunnel, and the series has spent 5 years and 4 seasons letting everyone else, sons, mothers, agencies, empires, grieving scientists, audit his answer with their lives. Watch the doctrine work in the specific cases, because the show's restraint is a craft you can point at frame by frame. The Guardians Massacre is the bloodiest scene in the first season, and its kills are fast, unceremonial, almost clerical. The camera spending its attention on faces rather than wounds, on the betrayal rather than the meat. Doug Chestan's end, the darkest beat of the Sinclair arc, occupies seconds, no music, no lingering, the show stating the fact of it, and moving on with something like respect. Eve's destruction in the Conquest fight, the single most extreme image the series has risked, is framed at the exact distance where the truth is undeniable and the spectacle is refused, and the camera's first priority afterward is Mark's face learning it. Even Powerplex's lightning, the cruelest accident in the catalog, happens in a blur of motion the episode declines to replay. No slow motion aria, no second angle, the family simply gone and the silence doing the work. Set those choices against the way this franchise's imagery gets used outside the show. The fatality recreations, the gore compilations, the meme stills, and the line the production walks comes into focus. Every one of those scenes could have been staged to be enjoyed. None of them is. The show's violence is built to be carried, not collected, and the difference is measurable in seconds of screen time and degrees of camera angle. The quiet engineering that lets a series this extreme remain somehow humane. There are lines the show has not crossed, and the catalog should close by, naming the discipline. Because restraint is only visible against everything we have walked through tonight. The source material's most infamous page remains unadapted, 4 seasons and counting. A silence that is itself a decision renewed annually. The suicides and the broken children and the bottomless griefs are depicted briefly, factually, without appetite. The series has every tool to be the most sadistic show on television and has instead spent its capital becoming the most consequential one. And the difference between those two words is the entire reason a catalog like tonight's can be listened to at all, let alone at this hour in the dark, on purpose. Because that is the strange truth underneath this entire video, and it is the thought I will leave you with. Millions of people use this show, this catalog of trains and silos and burials, to relax, to feel something honest at the end of a day of feeling managed things. The show goes too far so that its tenderness has somewhere real to stand. And the tenderness is why we keep coming back. The kitchens, the apologies, the fathers trying, the boy who keeps getting up. A story that refuses to lie about the cost of strength earns the right to be believed about the worth of love. And this one, across every line it has ever crossed, has never once spent that earning cheaply. The world is still there, in the show, at the end of season 4. Occupied, bargained over, secretly ticking, but there. The family is still at the table. The lights in the kitchen are still on. Let the catalog settle then, the way the show itself always settles after the loud hours, into rooms. A conference room, sealed, and the silence after. A train tunnel and a boy still saying no. A gentle planet learning what the sky contains. A silo nobody respected. A living room in the suburbs where a man made of grief completed his circuit. A sky full of one face. A crater where a young woman rebuilt herself from the inside. A confession in a tailor's shop, a handshake above a city, a vial in a desk a galaxy away. Every one of them went further than it had to, and every one of them the show has spent 5 years proving went exactly as far as the truth it was carrying required. That is the whole catalog. That has always been the whole catalog. And so are yours, probably, dimmed at the end of this long catalog of the worst nights a cartoon ever staged. Turn them off. The wolves in the story are all announced to everyone, and none of them are coming tonight. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.